Hello, we're at Agileadria 2014. My name is Marco Keba, and today I'm joined by Vasco Duarte. So, Vasco, please tell us just a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Vasco Duarte, as you said, and I've been working with software since '98. And I found Agile purely by accident because one of the teams wanted to use extreme programming in 2004. And I was not a very big believer in Agile at that time. So I did the first project, and then after that I was hooked. I couldn't go back. I was a traditional project manager with a certification by IPMA, but after that I discovered that actually a lot of the things that I believed in as a traditional project manager were not really applicable in the software world. So I learned a new way of managing software projects and never looked back.
Okay. So yesterday you gave a very interesting talk about the NoEstimates, which somehow stirred up a lot of discussion in the conference. So can you just do a brief introduction of what is it with the NoEstimates? Does it literally mean that we do no estimations at all?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and just a quick introduction to why it's called NoEstimates. So myself, Woody Zuil, and Neil Killick had been writing a lot on Twitter about estimation being wasteful, i.e. estimation is done for projects but then not really used when you're running a project because things change. When you estimate, you create a plan. You have like a sequence of tasks with buffers and dependencies and so on. But once you started using Agile, you don't have that. You deliver independent pieces of value that we call user stories. So
Okay.
You no longer require the sequencing. You no longer require the dependency. But we were still estimating. Now, the second part is that we are really, really bad at estimation, as I showed in my presentation with several case studies from many different companies, even, of course, the very famous Chaos study on on-time delivery for projects. So,
By saying bad, you mean we are off, the estimates are off the real data?
yeah, so, for example, three guys wrote a paper in '86, and they said that a good estimate is an estimate that is within 25% of the original estimate 75% of the time. So mostly 1/4 wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, if I would give you money and you would tell me, I'm going to lose about 25% of your money, and that's with a 75% certainty because it could be a lot more, I would tell you, are you freaking nuts? I'm not going to give you any money. But that's what we think about estimates today. So NoEstimates is about rethinking the role of estimation and actually getting rid of estimation when possible. Today we've had many people coming and asking, well, but I have a contract, I'm a contractor and I need to bid for projects, so shouldn't I estimate? Of course you should. But that does not mean that you need to use that estimate to manage your project. That means you need to use that estimate to bid for the project, and then you can use the data you have from your project, as I explained in my presentation, to manage the project as it goes on. You can use NoEstimates to manage a project that you've estimated.
Okay, so the traditional Agile, if we can call it traditional Agile method, would be to estimate the user stories, meaning that there are different sizes of work. Like we have ones, we have twos, we have threes, fives, eights, and so on. And then we combine the amount of work, we estimate the user stories using whatever, planning poker,
so-called
planning poker, affinity, whatever. And then we get, the idea that we have an X number, 500 story points to deliver, and then we can sort of measure the time. So how is NoEstimates different to that?
Okay, so the biggest difference is that if I use NoEstimates, I don't care how many points a story has. And I actually showed one graph in the presentation yesterday that was shared by Corey Foy on Twitter, at Corey_Foy, and you can check his stream and you will find it. And he took many stories from a 2-year project with many teams, and he mapped that. And the way he mapped that was that he plotted the shortest time it took to deliver a story of a particular size. So, for example, a story of 0 story points took between 0 and 250 days to deliver. Mm-hmm. That means one story took 0 and another one took 250 days.
Those are the extremes. Yeah.
Those are the extremes, right? The minimum and the max. And he did that for all sizes. So 0, 1, 2, 5, 8, 13, 40, and 100, I think, were the numbers. And he also did something very interesting, is that he plotted the average of the whole population of stories for each of the story point buckets. So for example, the average time it took to deliver a story of 0 story points was around 25 days. The average time it took to deliver a story of 8 points was also about 25 days. Oh, and by the way, the average story of 100 points also took about 25 days to deliver. So the question is, if all stories take on average the same time to deliver, why do we care about the extremes? And this is really the thing about NoEstimates. It's about measuring what your project is delivering, not assuming you know exactly what needs to be delivered when it needs to be delivered, and understand or assume that you know the size of that thing, which is what traditional estimation does. If you are doing story point estimation, by the way, and that's one of the things I showed in the presentation, you're already much better than traditional estimation. Let's be very clear about this, right?
Okay.
But you can be even better while spending less time doing work that people hate to do. Most developers are bored out of their brains in their so-called planning poker estimation meetings. They just hate it because there's no technology there. They just give numbers that are completely abstracted from reality. They have huge discussions, some of them have huge discussions about whether a story is a 3 or an 8. That's totally useless from a project delivery point of view, right? So I do something much simpler. I ask the people in the team, can we deliver this story tomorrow? So for me, stories should be about 1 day. Why 1 day? Because if you're wrong and you can't do the story tomorrow, when will you know it? Tomorrow. And then you can react. So it's about shortening the feedback cycle, really. But as a side effect, it gives you more data for you to measure the throughput of the whole system, and therefore to be able to know how much amount of work can we deliver by date X.
So
right?
how do we do that? How do we get how much amount of work we can deliver by date X with the NoEstimates?
So here's what I do. I typically work in projects that have fixed date release dates, right? They are consumer products, and the old saying goes, Christmas is never late. So if you are late, you don't sell. That's as simple as that. So for us, in my domain, fixed release dates are extremely important. So we manage the projects to hit the date. And of course, we vary the scope, right? So how do I do that? How do I know how much scope I can deliver by that date? So it's very simple, really. What I do is that I measure how many stories have been delivered over the previous sprints, and I just average that. And I use the average and project that into the future. So for example, the last 3 sprints we delivered 5, 2, and 7 stories, for example, right? So that's an average of, is it 3 or 4 stories, right? So I know that it's very likely I will deliver around 4 stories in the next few sprints, but it could be as high as 7, it could be as low as 2. So I have now an interval. I know that I could deliver, let's say if it's 4 and I have 10 sprints left, I could be delivering between 70 and 20 stories.
True.
But very likely only 40 stories or around 40 stories. So that's what I use. And that allows me, because I have fixed dates, allows me to manage the scope so that I hit the right date for release of the product.
Okay, so we're just going to count the number of stories. We're not going to count the size of the stories. It's totally irrelevant, the size of the story in the matter of the NoEstimates.
Well, I want to be cautious here because, of course, the size of a story is not irrelevant. That's why we break them down. But when you want to look at the future, how many stories will you deliver in the next 10 sprints? You will have, just like Corey Foy demonstrated with his graph, you will have stories that you think are 100 story points, but take the exact same amount of time as a story that is 2 story points.
Yeah, this
But
seems
that-
very counterintuitive, that it takes the same amount of time to deliver a big user story and to deliver a small user story.
So that's the beauty with statistics. One story does not take the same amount of time. But when you take all of the stories, you use the average, right? So if in the last 10 sprints you deliver 20 stories, probably you're going to deliver 2 stories in the next sprint. Now, you could deliver 5 or 0, but for sure, in the next sprint, you will not deliver 20 stories because it took you 10 sprints to deliver 20 stories, right? So there you already have actionable information. You know that if I need to deliver another 20 stories, I will need to at least account for 10 sprints. It might be 12 sprints or it might be 8 sprints, but it's going to be around 10 sprints. That's actionable information for the project manager to manage their project. And that is really the benefit of this system that I am showing people here, is that it gives you information you can make decisions on. It's actionable information.
And there is wide statistics that can prove that this actually works. That if you use the NoEstimates method compared to the traditional estimating methods, it's going to give you basically the same results. You're just saving the time of the estimation itself.
Actually, it will give you better results. But what I would like to say is that people should experiment. They should try it out on their own. And by the way, you don't need to ask permission to use NoEstimates. You can just use the data you already have about your project. So, for example, you could go and check right now how many stories did we deliver last week and the week before and the week before, or last sprint and the sprint before and the sprint before. Take 3 to 5 sprints, average that out, project that into the future, and you know how many stories you will deliver in the next X sprints, whatever that X means for you. Might be 5 sprints, might be 3 sprints, whatever is important in your project timeline. And anyone can do this right now and prove to themselves that they are now able to predict the throughput of their teams.
And save the time that was used up for the meetings. For
well, that's the side effect, right? Once you are confident that, yes, I can predict the throughput of my project over the next whatever sprints are important for you, 5, 10, whatever, then you don't need to spend any time estimating the stories anymore.
So actually there is no special learning or anything that needs to happen before we start that. It's already there and we can start experimenting tomorrow.
So that's what I would ask people to do. Just don't believe me. Try it on your own. Go to your project, get the data, do the projection, and see that it actually works. The example I showed in the presentation I did gave us a margin of error of 4%. It was a 24 sprint project. And when I used the data from the first 3 sprints, I could predict the throughput of the whole project, 24 sprints project, with a 4% error margin. No estimation technique will give you a 4% error margin.
Well, that seems really cool, the 4%. Compared to what was, I mean, the project was estimated the other way around as well, right?
Yeah, so the same team did that project estimating with story points, and story points gave them an error of 20%. When you considered more data, i.e. not 3 but 5 sprints, they had an error of 13%. So let's be very clear, and I did say that already. If you use story points, you're doing much better than if you're doing the traditional Gantt chart per chart type estimation for your project, right? So you also have invest stories, so user stories that are independent, negotiable, testable, and so on. That gives you the flexibility you then need, that using the NoEstimates information, you can manage the scope to be on time.
Okay. Are there any system boundaries for this to work, for the NoEstimates to work?
Okay, so one of the things that I talk about in the talk, and people can find out more in my website at softwaredevelopmenttoday.com. But one of the things that I talk about is that we are looking at the system of development, and a system of development is not one team, it's not 2 teams. It's everything that happens from the moment an idea comes in to the moment a product goes out. And we need to measure the throughput of this whole system. If you know the throughput of this whole system, you also know when the throughput changes. So, for example, if the throughput is oscillating wildly, then your variation, i.e. your interval of projection, is going to be much wider. A team that I showed in the presentation that is delivering between 2 and 4 stories per iteration is going to have a very small variation on their throughput. But there are other teams that could deliver between 1 and 15 stories, for whatever reason. Maybe they are a bigger team. Mm-hmm. Maybe they still have problems splitting the stories and some stories are too big. Whatever the reason is, with NoEstimates, we look at this as the whole system throughput. Mm-hmm. Right? So what this tells us is, 1, we know the throughput of the system on average. We know the maximum and the minimum. We know the variance that you have. And we also know, because we follow this, when the system is not stable. Now, what does it mean for a system not to be stable? Let's say you started a project. It's very likely that the teams will increase their velocity over time, increase their throughput over time until they reach a plateau, and then the velocity is stable. And that's good, because stability gives you predictability. But it takes some time to get there. So they might have, for example, 5 sprints in a row where their velocity is going up. I mean, the whole project, right? Not one team, but the whole project.
Okay.
If the velocity is going up linearly for 5 sprints, then you know the system is not yet stable. So you shouldn't use that data with a high degree of confidence to predict the future throughput. Or, for example, if you have an average and the velocity of the team is very different from the average, 3 or more sprints in a row, which tells you that, okay, something is happening. We need to look at what is happening. We don't know what it is, but definitely we can't use this data to predict the future delivery throughput. So those are 2 rules I use. If the velocity is going up or going down for 4 sprints in a row, let the system find its stability, then you can use the data to predict the future. If your velocity is oscillating wildly for more than 3 sprints in a row, i.e. there is very high or very low for 3 sprints or more in a row, then you also need to wait and let the system stabilize. Now, you also should look at why the system isn't stable, because it could be for, maybe there's a manager that comes in every Tuesday and says, this is urgent, stop everything else, we need to do this, right? Mm-hmm. That would affect the throughput of the system. That's just one example. There are many reasons why that could happen.
Mm-hmm. So once the system is stable, we just use what we have said. We just lose the time that we have invested in estimation, count the number of user stories, project the data, the average data into the future, and we're going to be at least as accurate as we were before.
Yeah, so I have not seen any evidence of the contrary, of it being less accurate. But, I mean, to be honest, it's not very hard to be more accurate than traditional estimation, right? Because even the experts say that it's okay to be 25% wrong 75% of the time.
Yeah.
And that's really bad, at least where I come from. I mean, to give you an example, we sell consumer products. If we don't have the box with our software on the shelves in the supermarkets in November, our competitors will get our shelf space. We can't afford to be 25% late, because that would mean no sales for Christmas. So that is not applicable for us. For us, a good estimation method gives us an error of maybe a couple of weeks. That's it. And we're talking about a 52-week project typically. So 2 weeks in a 52-week project, that's the error we can live with.
Yeah, and we can get it with the NoEstimates method.
Yes, but not just because we are better at estimating, but because NoEstimate gives us the information we need to manage the scope. As I typically say, it's not magic, it's hard work. Right? And NoEstimate gives me the information as a project manager to look at the backlog and say, okay, we can deliver this much. Is that good enough? If not, let's figure out how to make it good enough, because we can't deliver more.
Yeah, true. Okay, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.